this will be another wheels video, but for anybody who's been watching the videos so far, I will be, on the next video, I will be returning to the 25 cars that I've got ongoing and the 2 Mercuries. In fact, I'll be starting with those 2 Mercuries specifically. For now, we've got these 3 Matchboxes, the Ford RS200, which is only about halfway through, the Trans Am, which was completed on another video, good few months ago now, and then the Pontiac Fiero, which I've done the top half of in a previous video. I've done the glass in a previous video, but it's still only about halfway through. Anyway, all these 3 are going to be getting wheels made out of snap fasteners. Here are the snap fasteners from Hobbycraft. I think they're designed for, I don't know, making some kind of press stud for some clothes or something. They come on a sprue like a model. That's a good point to paint them. Don't worry about the things on the outside of the sprue. There is a use for them, but we're concentrating on the things on the inside at the moment, those things that suspiciously look like 4-spoke wheels. As in the last video, the basis of the wheel is this bead, which has the imaginative title Kids Bead. So you saw the Kids Bead in half, and then when you've got it into 2 separate halves, you take each half and the rough bit, sand it down on some 80 or 120 grit, and then you'll end up with a nice smooth. This is basically your wheel, as I said in the last one. You paint that black, unless you happen to be using the one particular bead that comes in each pack that's like this, that's already black. Ideally, what you need is to build up a nice little inventory of snap fasteners and the plumbing O-rings that we talked about earlier. These are the kind of pliers that you'll need, some end cutters and then just some little long nose things. The O-rings that I'm using this time are going to be slightly bigger than the beads themselves. They'll fit around the edge, they're not so big that they'll go over the bead, but we'll build up the tyre walls then using the heat shrink tube. There's no point in even really going into the dimensions of these plumbing O-rings because there's nothing to say that you'll get that exact same plumbing O-ring from the DIY shop or whatever. They're almost impossible to order online because they either come in ridiculous quantities or it's hard to tell how big they'll actually be because there's so many different dimensions. It's not just the diameter, but it's the thickness and the width, and you're better off just going into a DIY shop, having a look at the plumbing O-rings and just get all the ones that look like they're roughly Matchbox car wheel sized, and then you'll have a nice selection to pick from and you can just mix and match a bit. And the same can be said for any little round things that have got a hole in the middle for the axle to go through and a bit of a pattern on so they look like they might make a wheel. Just get all them up because they're always very cheap, and then you've just got a big box full of stuff you can make wheels out of basically. So to get the press stud backing plate onto the half bead that we've got painted, just put a few little blobs of super glue around it and then just present the press stud backing plate to it. I mean, the holes should line up perfectly so you can have a look through the holes and make sure you can see daylight perfectly, but then mount it on an axle, make sure you've got it on there nice and straight. So once you've got all these onto however many wheels you're making, whether you're making 1 set or 3 sets like at the same time like I'm doing at the moment, and then you've got all the inner edges of all your plumbing O-rings painted ready, then this is kind of what you'll end up with. So to get the plumbing O-ring itself mounted onto what's becoming the wheel, you need to put the super glue, but sort of right on the edge. Don't put it round the edge of where the press stud backing plate is because the super glue will bleed onto the press stud backing plate and make the wheel look a bit stupid. But also you don't just want it on the edge of the wheel because it won't make contact with the thing then. So you want to get it kind of in between the 2 edges, just how I was doing it there basically. And then you should find that the O-ring will fit nicely. These O-rings just happen to fit perfectly around these press stud backing plates. But it's like I say, you'll be in a similar sort of position. If you end up building up a decent enough inventory, you'll always be able to find some O-rings that will fit. And if you can't, then you might have some different backing plates or different press stud pieces that you can make fit instead. So once you've got all that put together and the paint's completely dry, then it's time to put it face down onto a sanding pad. This is about 2000 grit, this one. I've made it very wet, so you should find in no time at all you can sand where you've painted around the edge, you can sand that off so it just leaves a nice wheel rim. Then it's time to put a bit of heat shrink tube on. Just as before, use the lighter just in very, very short bursts just to apply it. These wheels all took at least 2 layers. In some cases I use 3. It can vary sometimes. I don't know if there's some inconsistencies with the thickness. The dandy shine around the outside to sort of slick up the tyre, that's optional. You don't need to use that if you just want to leave it like a natural rubber look. You can do. It's always worth just trimming the lengths of heat shrink tube. It's always worth trimming them down properly so they fit properly because it's just less work to do later. And then, like I say, just quick bursts like that. You will need to build up 2 or 3 layers onto, well, in this particular case, I had to build up 2 or 3 layers. Depending on how far the tyre edge sticks out over the bead that you're using, you might not have to use as much as that. But after 3 layers, this is what I ended up with. I'm using thicker than normal brass rod to make the axles, and to put the crimp, you've got to put the end in that part of the pliers and just crush it. Just crush and crush and crush until eventually it splays out enough. The metal will, because brass is obviously a lot softer than the metal that these pliers are made out of, so the pliers will always win. And you just put the end of the axle into that part of the plier that really isn't supposed to be used, and you just use that as like a press to just crush the end of it. And eventually, you might take you 2 or 3 goes. I mean, that didn't work, so you put the same crushed end back into the same bit of the pliers and you crush it some more. Just really, really put some pressure on, and it will flatten out just that little bit more. And that's not going anywhere. It's on. It does look a little bit rough, so you can sand the end of it down on some harsh grit like 120 grit. It will take it down and neaten it up a little bit, and you should end up with something that looks a little bit like that. So that's your crimped end that will stop your wheel from coming off. If the wheel ends up sitting a little bit too far in, you can use these tiny little beads as spacers. Just mount them on the axle first, and then mount the wheels, and then trim the axle down to suit, and it should end up looking like that. They're from the Hobbycraft beads section, and they cost absolutely nothing. And this is what we end up with. All you've really got to bear in mind is just when you're cutting the bead to start with, make it nice and straight, get the cut nice and straight, and if it needs sanding to make it straight, then so be it. Put the effort in to sand it. Put the effort in when cutting the heat shrink tube. Put the effort in when cutting the axles. Make sure the axles are just the right sort of width with just the right amount to be able to put that decent sized crimp in there, and sand the crimp down so it looks relatively tidy. I mean, the crimps in this, because it's a thick axle, and we've had to put such a crimp in it to guard against the wheels falling off when the wheels have got a larger than normal hole in them. They've sort of ended up a little bit like the end of a very, very small flathead screwdriver, but that's okay. That's not too obtrusive. I mean, the crimps that are in the factory wheels are usually look like little rounded sort of bobbly heads, so I don't think there's anything wrong with having these tiny little sort of slots just visible if you look closely. Like I say, as long as you tidy them up all right. So as long as you do each stage carefully and patiently, and measure everything out properly and cut everything out, take the time to cut everything to the proper length, all the heat shrink tubes, the axles themselves, everything like that. Make sure that everything's mounted on properly and centrally and straight. Just keep checking all the way through. Then you will just end up with perfectly functioning rolling wheels at the end of all this. And you might say, well, you can just buy all these off aftermarket and they look the same. They probably look even neater because they're made by a machine and not made by a person. But, well, where's the hobby then? You want something to do, otherwise there's no hobby there. And besides, because of all the different combinations of colour and different sizes of different things that you can use, yours will pretty much be unique. I mean, I've deviated a little bit from what I was planning to do originally anyway. The Fire O, I think, probably is going to look best with these gold ones, and they were originally intended for the Trans Am. The Trans Am looks better with silver ones. The ones that I did for the Fire O, I thought they might look alright on this Sierra, actually, especially if you lower it a bit. So there's all sorts of things you can do, so just make some, and then find a car that they'll look good on. I think that's probably the best way to do it. Make a load of them, and then you can mess about for hours finding which ones look best on different cars. Anyway, I think that's it. Thanks for watching.